But what do you think about the political atmosphere in America? We have this debt crisis. We have a...
We don't have a debt crisis. That's more propaganda.
Is it? Okay.
Take a look at any of the serious economists.
Yeah.
I mean, well, to be precise, there's a long-term debt crisis, but there is no short-term deficit crisis. And the debt crisis, yes, it's long-term. It's due primarily to Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. Reagan had fiscal policies were just totally wild. He tripled U.S. debt. He turned the United States very quickly from the world's leading creditor to the world's leading debtor. Well, during the 1990s, that was kind of leveled off a little bit, and in fact, Clinton left office with a slight budget surplus. Then George W. Bush came along, and radical tax cuts for the rich, wild spending, so there's more debt. Now, the deficit, which is not the debt, that's a short-term phenomenon. And yes, there's a deficit, but it's not the major problem by any means. I mean, joblessness is the major problem.
Yes.
And if there was any interest in dealing with the deficit, the sources are pretty well known. I mean, about half the deficit is due to military spending.
But there's so much discontentment in America. There's
discontent over joblessness.
Hatred.
Not the deficit. Yeah. You take a look at polls. The actual unemployment is, in some sectors of the economy, at the levels of the Great Depression. And in many ways worse. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Great Depression. My family was mostly unemployed working class. And it was pretty bad, but it was hopeful. There was a sense we're going to get out of this somehow. There were things happening that made it look as if there's a way out. That's missing now. There's a sense that we're not going to get out of it. And that may be correct. Manufacturing industry, which is sort of the core of an employment economy, that has been very consciously undermined and moved offshore. It's great for the corporations. They make a huge amount of profit. But it's for the population. Since Reagan, since around 1980, real wages have mostly stagnated or declined. There is enormous wealth, but it's in very few pockets. I mean, everyone knows that the U.S. is highly unequal since roughly 1980. But what's less known is that the inequality is largely driven by a fraction of 1% of the population, a sector so small it's not even picked up in census figures. Economists have to do elaborate analysis to figure it out. And what it means is, if you look at who these people are, they're CEOs, heads of corporations who are paid way more than in Europe, hedge fund managers, financial manipulators and so on. And people who do nothing for the economy, but are absorbing a huge amount of whatever wealth is produced, while the population is, it's not suffering like the third world, but people don't measure themselves against the Stone Age. They measure themselves against what the world ought to be like in the richest country in the world. And yes, they're very angry. And unfortunately, the anger is taking extremely dangerous forms.
Dangerous forms, you say? What are those?
Well, you want to see what forms it's taking? Just look at the front runner for the next election. Rick Perry, governor of Texas, is highest in the polls, way higher than other Republican candidates, but higher than Obama, too. And take a look at his policies. Rick Perry is, of course, he's a climate change denier. I mean, his state, Texas, is burning up, but he says there's no climate change. It's all a hoax, liberal hoax. That's dangerous, not just for the United States, but for the world. And in fact, he's riding a wave of denial of climate change. The new Republican Congress, the ones that came in 2010, almost entirely climate change deniers. Furthermore, with him, it's kind of a matter of conviction, because he's associated with an extremist Christian evangelical set, which is preparing for the second coming in our lifetimes. So it really doesn't matter. And what has to be done is to eliminate the demons who are controlling the society and the world. Maybe 25% of the Republican Party thinks Obama may be Antichrist, and It wants to get rid of the income tax. It destroyed the country. It wants to get rid of popular election of senators. Shouldn't be allowed. Get rid of Social Security, of course. All of these are caused by demons. And he does get the support of the business classes. I mean, they think he's crazy, but he's kind of like he leads the attack on unions, on Social Security, which they hate, on the limited medical care that exists, and cut back on taxes for the rich. In fact, the tax system is extremely regressive by now. You take a look at Bush's tax cuts. More than half went to the top few percent of the population, and they're fighting like anything to keep those. You can destroy everything else, but don't stop the tax cuts for the rich. Well, all of these programs, I won't run through the whole story, but implementation of those programs would not only severely harm the United States, but it would severely harm the world. I mean, if the United States refuses to do anything about climate change, the world is going to suffer. There isn't going to be any constructive way of dealing with this if the U.S. is not only dragging its feet, but going backwards. I mean, Perry and the Republicans in Congress are right now dismantling the very limited legislation to deal with carbon emissions. They're dismantling it. They want to get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency, which incidentally was instituted by Nixon.
Okay. Yes.
In fact, if you look back at U.S. politics, the last liberal president was Richard Nixon. If he was in Congress now, he'd be considered way off on the left. There's been a very substantial change, and there are reasons for it.
But have the corporation and the financiers, the bankers, have they totally taken over American democracy?
Well, I wouldn't say they're extremely influential. I mean, if you go back to, say, 1970, I mean, there was a very substantial growth period, what economists call the golden age, 50s and 60s. Very rapid growth, relatively egalitarian growth. And there were, of course, banks at the time. But they did the things that banks are supposed to do in a state capitalist system. I mean, what a bank is, I won't talk about Iceland, but what a bank is supposed to do is take unused capital, like, say, my bank account, and distribute it to productive uses, like starting a business or buying a car or sending your children to college or something or other. And that's pretty much what it was up until roughly mid-70s. Since the mid-70s, and they were a fairly small part of the total economy. Yes. By now, there was a major shift in the U.S., British, and to a substantial extent international Western economic system at that time, with an enormous growth of financialization, of financial speculation. It had to do with elimination of the controls on currency through the early period. It was the Bretton Woods period. There were currency was pretty much regulated. Then it was freed in the early 70s. Capital controls were banned. They'd been used all the time. And there was a tremendous growth of speculative capital. And that led to a concentration of capital in financial institutions. And concentration of capital translates into political power. That's as old as Adam Smith. And that meant that legislation was passed which accelerated the concentration. Fiscal policies like taxes, deregulation, rules of corporate governance. It set in motion a kind of a vicious cycle which keeps feeding on itself, leading to very high concentration of economic and political power, substantially in the financial organizations, and stagnation or decline for everyone else. It's dramatic since Reagan. Also, since Reagan, there were repeated financial crises. There were none in the 50s and the 60s because the New Deal regulations were still in force. When they were dismantled, of course, you start getting financial crises and bailouts and so on, each one worse than the last. At the same time, the cost of elections started to skyrocket. That just drives both political parties into the hands of pockets of the corporate sector, mostly financial sector. I think I mentioned by 2007, right before the crash, financial institutions had about 40% of corporate profits, and they don't. It's unlikely that they contribute anything to the economy. They may harm it. Yeah. But they're, and again, you have your own experience, but it's a general fact, and there are reasons for it. I mean, if you take a look at serious economic theory, it's completely predictable, very predictable. I mean, when you institute market-style systems, most of the system is not really a market system, all kind of protectionist measures and state interference, but the financial sector did move to a kind of a market system in these years. Now, in a market system, if you make a transaction, suppose you sell me a car, let's say. If you and I we're paying attention, we'll arrange the transaction so that you and I benefit from it. But we don't pay any attention to what are called externalities, to the effect of the purchase on him, let's say. And there is an effect. Like there's an extra car on the road, there's more pollution, gas prices go up, and that magnifies. Well, that's negative externalities. Suppose you're a CEO of Goldman Sachs. If you make a transaction, you recognize that if it's a risky transaction, it might cost you. If it's a risky transaction, it's going to make high profits, but of course there's a danger that it'll crash. So you take care, if you're paying attention, you take care of the potential losses to yourself. You do not take account of what's called systemic risk, the risk that if your transactions go bad, the whole system collapses. But that's exactly what happens repeatedly. So what you're doing is underinsuring systemic risk, and that virtually guarantees financial crises. Now, for, say, Goldman Sachs, it's not a problem because they may talk free market, but they believe in a powerful state. They want a powerful state which comes to their rescue, which is what happens repeatedly. After every crisis, the taxpayer bails them out. And in fact, if you look closely, the credit rating agencies today actually, when they rate the value of a corporation, say Goldman Sachs, they take into account the likelihood that it'll be bailed out by the taxpayer if their risks go bad, so they're ranked higher. All of that encourages the behavior, which is, for simple market reasons, almost guaranteed to lead to crashes. And we're now preparing for the next one.
Yes. Well, the politicians seem to be unable to tame this beast.
Oh, they're able to tame it, all right. They choose not to.
Yeah.
And in fact, when these politicians are, like, say, Obama, put into office by funding from the financial institutions, they're unlikely to do it. I've only barely skimmed the surface. It goes beyond this. I mean, the political parties in the United States used to have internal rules. So, for example, if a member of Congress wanted to move into a more senior position, head of a committee or something, it was based on service, seniority, and so on. With the Republicans, that changed about 25 years ago, and the Democrats are not far behind. By now, you have to buy your way into a committee chairmanship. You have to pay the party if you want to be a committee chairman. Now, how do you get to pay the party? You go into the same corporate pockets, which means you're indebted to them.